4,000 sailors, 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer. Sleep schedules destroyed. Welcome to the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier. $13 billion of engineering, 1,092 feet of floating steel, and the impossible task of keeping nearly 5,000 humans alive, fed, and combat-ready while launching 160 aircraft sorties every single day. This isn't a cruise ship. There's no escape hatch, no calling in sick. When you're 200 miles offshore in the Mediterranean for 8 months straight, exhaustion doesn't become a problem. It becomes normal. But here's what the recruitment videos don't tell you. How automation cut the crew by 600 sailors compared to older carriers, yet somehow the workload got more intense. How the ship's revolutionary launch systems promise 25% more sorties but keep breaking down mid-deployment. How a sailor can stand on a flight deck the size of 4 football fields and still feel the walls closing in. The numbers behind this floating city reveal an engineering marvel, but they also expose an extreme test of human endurance that most people can't even imagine. So how does it actually work? The USS Gerald R. Ford isn't just the world's most expensive warship. It's a contradiction. On paper, it's the apex of naval efficiency, CVN 78, commissioned in 2017. Longer than 3 football fields laid end-to-end, nuclear-powered with a 50-year service life ahead. The kind of engineering that makes other nations' navies look like toy boats in a bathtub. But zoom in on the humans inside and the story shifts. 4,297 sailors, that's the official count. 508 officers and 3,789 enlisted. When the air wing deploys, that number pushes closer to 5,000. All of them crammed into a ship that, despite its massive size, offers roughly as much personal space as a coffin. Now here's where it gets intense. This ship doesn't operate on banker's hours. The Ford's mission demands 160 aircraft sorties per day, sustained for over 30 days straight. During surge operations, 270 sorties daily. That's more than 40 launches and recoveries happening around the clock, every single day. To maintain that tempo, sailors work 12-hour shifts, day shift for weeks, then night shift, then back to days. Your body never adapts, your brain never catches up. One sailor who served during the 23 deployment described it bluntly: sleep schedules get destroyed. Exhaustion becomes normal. Think about that for a second. Exhaustion isn't a warning sign, it's the baseline. The flight deck crew catches maybe 4 to 6 hours of sleep between shifts, if they're lucky. But sleep quality? That's another story. Try falling asleep when the deck above you is landing 47,000-pound fighter jets every few minutes. The entire ship vibrates. The arresting cables scream. Jet engines roar at full thrust just 60 feet from your bunk. White noise, the crew calls it. You tune it out or you don't sleep at all. And you can't leave. Not for coffee. Not for fresh air. Not for a mental health day. When you're deployed 200 miles offshore, the ocean becomes your prison guard. One sailor put it simply: you can't leave. But wait, didn't automation make this easier? Here's the thing. The Ford was designed to operate with 600 fewer crew members than the old Nimitz-class carriers. 600. That's an entire infantry battalion's worth of people. Gone. Automation handles tasks that used to require human hands. Launch systems, arresting gear, even weapons elevators got the AI treatment. The Navy celebrated this as an efficiency breakthrough. Smaller crew means lower costs, fewer mouths to feed, less training overhead. But here's what they didn't advertise. Those 600 missing sailors didn't make life easier for the remaining 4,000. They just concentrated the intensity. Fewer people means each sailor becomes more critical to operations. One person calls in sick, someone else pulls a double shift. A system malfunctions, fewer hands to fix it while maintaining the 160 sortie tempo. The automation didn't eliminate work, it eliminated slack. So you have this bizarre equation. The most technologically advanced carrier in history, capable of launching 25% more sorties than its predecessors, powered by a crew running on fumes and surviving through sheer willpower. That's the real challenge of the Gerald R. Ford. Not the enemy, not the ocean. It's the relentless, grinding, soul-crushing pace of operations where the mission tempo never, ever stops. because the technology designed to help you has also made you irreplaceable. So how does a ship this demanding actually function? The answer is a carefully orchestrated ballet of automation, logistics, and human endurance, working in perfect and sometimes imperfect synchronization. Let's start with the revolution. The Ford-class carriers represent the first complete redesign of American carrier architecture since the 1960s. And the centerpiece of that redesign? Two systems with very Silicon Valley names, EMALS and AAG. EMALS, the electromagnetic aircraft launch system, replaces the steam catapults that have launched Navy jets since World War II. Instead of superheated steam, EMALS uses electromagnetic energy. It's smoother, more precise, easier to control, and according to the specs, it should require far less maintenance. Land-based testing backed this up. 3,807 dead loads, 523 actual aircraft launches. The numbers looked good on paper. Then there's AAG, Advanced Arresting Gear. When a 47,000-pound FA-18 Super Hornet slams onto the deck at 150 miles per hour, AAG is what stops it in 300 feet. 747 successful arrestments during at-sea testing. Together, these systems form the backbone of how the Ford maintains its blistering sortie rate. Launch, recover, refuel, rearm, launch again. The cycle repeats every few minutes, 18 hours a day for months on end. Here's the promise. Automation reduces the crew needed for flight operations. The old steam catapults required dozens of sailors for maintenance. EMALS theoretically needs far fewer. Same logic for AAG versus the old hydraulic arresting cables. 600 fewer sailors, 25% more sorties. The math seemed simple, but mathematics on a PowerPoint slide don't account for what happens when you're 8 months into a deployment and one of those electromagnetic launch systems decides it doesn't feel like working today. We'll come back to that. For now, understand the operational rhythm. The Ford works in watches, maritime terminology for shifts. The crew divides into sections, port and starboard, blue and gold, day and night. When the day crew is launching aircraft, the night crew is sleeping, or trying to. When night crew takes over, day crew collapses into their racks. Except it's never that clean. Maintenance doesn't respect the watch schedule. Equipment breaks at 3 a.m. just as often as 3 p.m., and when it does, someone has to fix it. Shift be damned. This is the factory that never closes model. Think of it like a massive automotive assembly line, except the line is a flight deck. The product is air superiority over hostile territory, and the margin for error is measured in lives. The ship's galley operates on the same relentless schedule. Exact meal counts for the Ford aren't in the declassified data, but the logistics are staggering. Feed 4,000 people 3 meals a day for 90 days straight without resupply? That's over 1 million meals from onboard stores. Storage, preparation, service, cleanup, all on continuous rotation. Cooks work in shifts just like everyone else. The galley never closes. Someone is always eating. Someone is always cooking. And here's the thing about that 90-day number. It's not a goal. It's a minimum requirement. The Ford must be able to sustain full combat operations for 3 months without pulling into port. No fresh food, no reinforcements, no escape valve. During the 2023 deployment to the Mediterranean supporting Operation Inherent Resolve, the Ford stayed at sea for over 8 months. That's 240 days, nearly 3 times the baseline sustainment requirement. Which brings us to the central tension of this entire operation. The automation works, mostly. The launch systems function, usually. The logistics hold together, barely. But mostly and usually and barely are thin margins when you're operating a $13 billion weapon system in a combat zone with 4,000 human lives, depending on those systems working flawlessly, every single time, for months without break. What happens when the technology fails? Let me tell you what the recruitment videos don't show. You're 19 years old, fresh out of boot camp. They assign you to the flight deck crew, the flight deck being Navy slang for the most dangerous workplace in America. Your shift starts at 6 a.m. You spend 12 hours in full gear, float coat, cranial helmet, steel-toed boots, doing back-breaking work in weather that swings from scorching heat to freezing spray. Jets roar past at 140 decibels. One wrong step puts you in front of a jet intake or behind a jet exhaust that'll turn you into mist. Shift ends at 6 p.m. Except it doesn't, because a hydraulic line burst on one of the launch systems and they need bodies to help fix it. So now it's 8 p.m., then 9. You finally stumble to your berthing compartment at 10:30. You share a 6 by 6 by 3 foot bunk with 2 other sailors. They call it hot racking. When one person gets up, another person gets in. The mattress is still warm. Your rack is 2 levels up, which means you're sleeping 30 inches from the ceiling. You can't sit up. You can barely roll over. The ship never stops vibrating. Machinery hums through the bulkheads. Announcements blast over the 1MC, the ship-wide intercom, at random intervals. Someone in your berthing compartment is always awake, always making noise, because everyone's on different watch schedules. You lie there, body aching, brain wired from 12+ hours of high-alert work. You've got maybe 5 hours until your next shift. You need sleep desperately, but it won't come. This is day 3 of deployment. You have 237 more days to go. Now multiply that experience by 4,000 sailors. Here's what one sailor, anonymous for obvious reasons, said about the 2023 deployment. Sleep schedules get destroyed. Exhaustion becomes normal. Mental health is a constant challenge. You can't leave. Read that last sentence again. You can't leave. No walking off the job. No calling your therapist. No taking a personal day. You're on a floating city 200 miles from land, and that city is your entire world for 8 months straight. The only variety in your day is whether you're working on the flight deck, in the hangar bay, or in the bowels of the ship maintaining equipment. Mental health becomes survival mode. You develop coping mechanisms, some healthy, some not. You learn to function on 4 hours of sleep. You learn to sleep through jet launches. You learn to ignore the crushing sameness of every single day. The Navy calls it adaptation. Psychologists call it chronic stress. Sailors just call it Tuesday. And here's the brutal part. This is by design. The operational tempo isn't a bug. It's the feature. The Ford was built to maintain 160 sorties per day for 30+ days. That tempo requires constant launches, constant recoveries, constant maintenance, constant readiness. The humans inside don't drive that tempo. They serve it. Now let's be clear. This isn't new. Carrier life has always been grueling. Nimitz-class sailors dealt with similar challenges for decades. One Nimitz deployment logged 159 consecutive days underway without a port call. No shore leave, no break, just ocean, steel, and work. But here's what changed with the Ford. The automation that reduced crew size didn't reduce the work. It compressed it. 600 fewer sailors means 600 fewer people to absorb the workload when systems break. And systems break constantly. Steam catapults were maintenance hogs, sure, but sailors knew how to fix them. EMALS, that's specialized electromagnetic engineering. AAG, advanced software diagnostics. The technology is more complex, which means repairs take longer and require more training. Fewer hands, more complexity, same relentless tempo. The math doesn't work in the sailor's favor. One more thing about mental health. Isolation isn't just being far from land. It's being surrounded by 4,000 people and still feeling completely alone. You can't have private conversations. The ship is too crowded. You can't process emotions. There's no safe space. You can't show weakness because everyone else is grinding through the same hell and nobody has the bandwidth to support you. So exhaustion becomes normal. Mental strain becomes background noise. You survive by going numb. That's not a failure of the sailors. That's the price of operating the most advanced aircraft carrier in human history. Let's talk about the elephant on the flight deck. The USS Gerald R. Ford was supposed to be the future. Revolutionary technology, unmatched capability, a quantum leap over the aging Nimitz-class carriers. And in many ways, it delivered, but in some critical ways, it didn't. Here's the myth. The Ford seamlessly achieves 160 sorties per day with surge capacity of 270, making it the most lethal carrier ever built. Here's the reality. That sortie rate? Probably not happening. Michael Gilmore, the former director of Operational Test and Evaluation, stated publicly that sortie rates similar to Nimitz-class carriers, 120 per day sustained, 240 during surge, would be acceptable. He called the Ford's higher forecasts unrealistic. Translation: the Navy's own testing director doesn't believe the Ford can hit its advertised numbers. Now let's get into the weeds. The Ford underwent 8 independent steaming events, at-sea testing periods to certify its systems for deployment. During those 8 events, mechanical failures with EMALS and AAG forced the ship to return to port early 3 times. 3 out of 8. That's a 38% failure rate during controlled testing before combat operations. The DOT&E, Department of Operational Test and Evaluation, published a report in fiscal year 2018 that pulled no punches. EMALS and AAG reliability remained far below the required 16,500 cycles between operational mission failures. The power distribution system for AAG had persistent issues. Testing strategies for achieving strategic goal requirements were still under review as of that report. Let me simplify this. The Ford's launch and recovery systems, the technological heart of its entire mission, couldn't meet reliability standards during peacetime testing. What happens when those systems fail during combat operations? You get delays, you get canceled sorties, you get sailors working 18-hour shifts trying to fix electromagnetic catapults while their ship is supposed to be projecting power in a hostile theater. But here's where the story takes a turn. Despite all these problems, the reliability shortfalls, the failed tests, the skepticism from the Pentagon's own evaluators, the USS Gerald R. Ford went on deployment in 2023 and absolutely crushed it. 10,396 sorties, over 8 months in the Mediterranean, averaging more than 40 launches and recoveries per day, every day, for 240 consecutive days. No port calls for weeks at a time, no breaks, no respite. The crew maintained combat readiness during one of the most volatile periods in recent Middle Eastern history, supporting operations related to the Israel-Hamas conflict, providing deterrence against Iranian aggression, backing up coalition forces across multiple theaters. And they did it while dealing with all those mechanical issues in real time. Think about that. The systems that failed during controlled testing somehow held together during months of brutal operational tempo in an active conflict zone. That's not magic. That's sailors working through the night, every night, to keep those electromagnetic catapults functioning. That's maintenance crews pulling miracles out of spare parts and sheer determination. The technology didn't save the day. The humans did. But that creates a different problem. If the Ford can only hit its sortie rates by running its crew into the ground, is that sustainable? Can you maintain that pace for the ship's entire 50-year service life? The Navy seems to think so. As of February 2026, the Ford is still deployed. There's talk of extending the deployment past mid-April, which would break post-Vietnam deployment length records. The ship keeps going, the crew keeps grinding, and the systems, they're improving, slowly. Testing continues, software updates roll out, reliability metrics creep upward. The OPTEF-4, the Navy's operational test force, keeps refining their assessment strategies for those strategic goal requirements. Maybe by the time the Ford completes its current deployment, the technology will finally match the hype. Maybe EMALS will consistently hit 16,500 cycles. Maybe AAG will stop having power distribution issues. Or maybe, and this seems more likely, the Ford will continue to operate as it always has, on the backs of 4,000 sailors who refuse to let a $13 billion ship fail on their watch. Because that's the actual story here. Not the technology. Not the sortie rates. Not the electromagnetic catapults. It's the crew. So what have we actually learned about how 5,000 sailors survive on the Gerald R. Ford? The truth is complicated. On one hand, this ship represents a genuine leap in carrier design. Automation cut crew requirements by 600 sailors compared to Nimitz-class carriers. That's massive. That's not just efficiency, that's reduced long-term operating costs, fewer personnel to train, smaller logistical footprint. The technology works. EMALS launches aircraft smoother than steam catapults. AAG arrests them with more precision. The nuclear reactors generate enough power to run electromagnetic systems that older carriers couldn't dream of. When everything functions properly, the Ford really can sustain higher sortie rates with fewer people. But here's the paradox. That automation didn't make life easier for the sailors. It made them more valuable and more expendable. More valuable because each sailor now represents a larger percentage of the total crew. Lose one person to illness or injury, and the operational impact is magnified. More expendable because the mission tempo doesn't adjust for human limitations. The ship can launch 160 sorties a day, whether the crew is fresh or running on fumes. So the crew runs on fumes. We've seen what that looks like. 12-hour shifts stretching to 14, 16 hours. Sleep cycles destroyed. Mental health strained to breaking. Exhaustion normalized to the point where exhausted becomes the baseline, and anything better is a luxury. And yet, they endure. 10,396 sorties during that 2023 deployment, 8 months of sustained combat readiness. No port calls for weeks at a stretch, systems breaking, sailors fixing them, launch, recover, maintain, repeat. That's not in the manual. You can't automate that. You can't engineer that kind of resilience. The USS Gerald R is scheduled for a 50-year service life. 50 years. The sailors currently aboard will retire, have kids, maybe even grandkids by the time this ship finally decommissions. New generations of sailors will walk those same flight decks, sleep in those same coffin racks, endure that same grinding operational tempo. And the ship will keep evolving. Future aircraft like the F-35C will operate from its deck. Unmanned systems. New technologies we can't even predict yet. The Ford-class design is built to adapt, to upgrade, to remain relevant against threats that don't exist yet. But the human element? That's constant. As of February 14th, 2026, our research date, the Ford is still deployed, still launching sorties, still testing those strategic goal requirements, still pushing the boundaries of what a carrier can do and what sailors can endure. There's talk of extending the deployment past mid-April. If that happens, it'll break post-Vietnam records for carrier deployment length. Another record, another milestone, another few weeks of grueling work for 4,000 sailors who signed up to defend their country and ended up discovering exactly how much the human body and mind can take before something breaks. Here's the thing about survival on the Gerald R. Ford. It's not about the systems. It's not about the automation. It's not even about the $13 billion. It's about 4,000 people making a choice every single day to keep going, to launch the next sortie, to fix the next breakdown, to work the next shift, to survive one more day in a floating city that never sleeps and never stops demanding more. That's how 5,000 sailors sleep, eat, and survive on the USS Gerald R. Ford. They just do, not because it's easy, not because the technology makes it simple, but because the alternative, letting a $13 billion ship fail, letting your crew down, letting your country down, is unthinkable. So they adapt, they endure, they survive, and the ship keeps sailing.